Hi, I'm Tess Allett and welcome to my UX case study on Adobe Creative Cloud and refining their service for Adobe Fonts. Adobe Creative Cloud is a subscription-based service used for graphic design, web design, photography, and video editing. These applications include both desktop and mobile, and they also have a variety of other services, including stock images, Behance, Portfolio, and Adobe Fonts. Members with the subscription service download Adobe CC Creative Cloud, which acts as a hub for all other applications and services. My initial hunch was that searching for Adobe Fonts through Adobe Creative Cloud was difficult because the initial search function at the top is not actually where you need to search for fonts. It's actually on the right-hand side. If you were to use that top search function, you can't actually find Adobe Fonts at all. If users can't find the fonts that they want, how would you expect them to use the service? I set to work to find out more. Was I alone in this? Turns out I wasn't. I even found online articles explaining a step-by-step process for users to explain to their clients how to manage their Adobe fonts. But Adobe is not the only design product on the market. What were other applications doing? The two I investigated were Google Web Designer and CorelDRAW. Google Web Design and Google Fonts is a free online service for digital design only. When navigating the online application, I was surprised to see just how easy it was to locate Google Fonts. In the More Fonts option, you then have an additional dialog where you can search through and filter accordingly. You didn't have to do much searching and it was very easy to implement. CorelDRAW is seen by many as Adobe's greatest competitor. In this application, you have the option of using your existing system fonts, or you have the option to get more. This leads you to the ability to download font packages, each contain their own quantity of weights and costs. You could easily see the fonts and decide for yourself whether or not you wanted to purchase it, and the payment portal was within the application itself. It didn't lead you elsewhere. While these two programs worked very differently, my initial hunch still stood, so I wanted to find out more. The next step was doing user interviews. 4 user interviews were then conducted, where I learned that most users didn't even know of Adobe Fonts' existence. Half expressed they didn't even enjoy using Adobe Creative Cloud, and they only used it when they had to update or install new applications. Also unprompted, many users expressed frustration with the rising subscription costs. 2 of the 4 interviewees at the end of the interview were excited at the concept of Adobe Fonts and look forward to using them in their future design projects, even though they struggled to use Adobe Fonts during the interview. My final insights were: users only interact with applications they use and know frequently. Originally, Adobe Fonts was known as Typekit and was only accessible through the web portal or through Adobe Creative Cloud. Because they weren't linked through the application, most users didn't know it existed. But users did seem interested in the flexibility and the variety that was available in Adobe Fonts, but they aren't interested if they're hidden or too many clicks away. Because users were interested in such a service but frustrated with the higher costs, potentially, if they were aware of all the services Adobe has to offer, they might feel more comfortable with paying those higher fees. My final recommendations were: how can we implement a streamlined typeface experience that distinguishes itself as Adobe Fonts, but is also easy to access? In what way can such a system be implemented that doesn't overwhelm the user with information and keeps things fast and easy to work with? From there, I then prioritised which pathway or portal was the best to work with, as there were 3 main ones to choose from: the Adobe Fonts webpage, the applications, or Adobe Creative Cloud app. But through my research and investigation, I then was steered away from Adobe Creative Cloud and more towards the Adobe applications, as that was where most users during the interviews purely navigated through. But before I got too locked down in any design solution, I first wanted to create some ideas and brainstorm. I set to work on a crazy 8 to see what options or what ideas could work in this situation. I circled back to the initial interviewees to see what their feedback was on these options. After gaining their feedback, I then charted the top 3 responses that I got and used a user-centered design method, UCD, to prioritise this information. As the feedback was split mostly 50-50 between two different Crazy 8 options, I created paper prototypes of each to see if there were any issues that could be avoided before going any further. As both paper prototypes felt quite strong in their application, I then decided to use an impact versus effort matrix in order to prioritise which would be the easiest to implement with both high impact and low effort. And ultimately it was settled upon that option A would be the best to move forward with. From there, the medium fidelity prototype was born. Because the application was already existing, I tried to implement a design look and feel so that any user testing with the prototype weren't immediately drawn to new features as they stood out amongst the existing design. Adobe has recently updated their applications to include Adobe Fonts. However, in their current application, instead of the drop-down showing Fonts and Adobe Fonts, it says Fonts and Find More, which many users seemed confused by and assumed this was a portal leading outside into a web page. As such, they didn't want to click on it. In this prototype, you have the drop-down right there available to you. From there, you can now search. In the existing Adobe application update, when you search, you can only search for each weight as an individual to activate. You don't get the option to activate all weights at once. I've refined this slightly by giving users the option to install all 8 weights if they require it, rather than scrolling through all of Adobe Fonts to activate the 8 weights in one click. Once they click on the little cloud icon on the right hand side, they're given the prompt to just confirm that they want to install the 8 weights. From there, the icons are now updated to indicate all the fonts that are activated on the application and ready to use. Once hovering over, can see that the font can be deactivated as requested. When testing the medium fidelity prototype, all users found this experience much easier to navigate. The only aspect that was confusing to some was that they weren't too sure how to activate the fonts because they assumed that they could activate each individual weight as well, but my prototype didn't allow that in its programming. Some of the feedback I also got was that it would be nice if the Adobe fonts could stand out more. I think more interviews need to be conducted in order to gain more insight as to whether or not such a feature would be required to implement if users are still struggling to access Adobe fonts easily. So what are my final thoughts? Overall, I think this prototype is strong and would be easy to implement for Adobe and would work well within the applications. As Adobe have recently updated their applications, this additional service would take very little UI in order to implement. I think though, having the ability to search, filter and refine like they have in the Adobe Fonts web portal would be an additional great feature to have. However, more user testing would be required to ensure that that would be a feature that other users would want and would happily use. Also, further user testing and interviews by Adobe should be conducted, as I believe that there are many services that aren't being fully utilised by their members. And because they're not being utilised by their members, those members are feeling frustrated with the rising costs because they can't validate them. I do think that moving forward, more users will utilise Adobe Fonts now that it's incorporated into the applications, and I look forward to seeing that in the future. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my UX case study today. I really appreciate it. Thank you.